So I've recently posted a couple of videos about recording rare breeding birds. The first about how to submit records, the second about what information those records should contain to be as useful as possible. In that second video I mentioned submitting breeding evidence, basically information about what the birds you saw or heard were doing. So in this third video I'm going to go into a bit more detail on recording breeding evidence. This is about proof of breeding. With the greater proof the better. From at one end just a bird being present somewhere where it could breed, to at the other end seeing a nest, eggs, chicks or recently fledged birds which confirm that breeding happened. There are a series of set codes used to classify breeding evidence, and these are a really useful standardised way to capture what you've observed that everyone will understand. They're grouped into three classes of possible, probable and confirmed breeding, with confirmed breeding referring to a breeding attempt where eggs were laid. Even if those eggs didn't hatch or the breeding failed at some other point, this is regarded as confirmed breeding. So I'm going to run through the evidence codes in ascending order. At the bottom, a bird in suitable breeding habitat in the breeding season could be regarded as possible breeding evidence. A bird in habitat code H. If it's way out of the normal breeding range for a species or very likely to be a migrant passing through, then you might disregard it, but otherwise that's an H. This does require a bit of knowledge about habitat use, is that breeding habitat, and the breeding range, and it can be a bit subjective, so if in doubt, seek advice. The other possible breeding record category is a singing male. Again, if it's in suitable habitat and not an obvious migrant. This is an S for singing. So if you come across a singing sow bunting, hear a booming bittern, or this willow warbler indeed, include an S in your record submission. BirdTrack and eBird have drop-down lists for breeding evidence to make this really easy to do. Next, we move to the larger number of evidence codes grouped together as probable breeding. An important thing to say is that the category label probable breeding can be a bit misleading. You might observe one of the relevant evidence codes, but also know that the birds did not actually breed. A pair was present for a while, maybe even built a nest, but then they left the site. They didn't breed. So you might think, well, that's not probable breeding, because I know for a fact they didn't breed. But ignore the probable terminology, it's a bit confusing. In fact, it'd be a bit better if this long-established system used different labels, I think, if there were evidence levels low, medium and high, for example. Basically, if you record one of these next evidence codes, it does count as probable breeding. So we'll run through them. So firstly, P for pair, nice easy one. Simply a pair present in suitable habitat in the breeding season. Make sure it's not just two birds, but a male and a female, though you might have to infer this if you can't actually tell the sexes apart in the field. You know, two dark-footed warblers stalking around a bush. Next, a territory, T. Birds present displaying territorial behaviour, such as singing, at the same place on 2 days or more, at least a week apart. So they've been there for at least a week, holding a territory. So you might find a singing redwing, recording it as an S for singing, but return a fortnight later and it's still singing. It becomes a T. D is for displaying birds. You might have heard a lapwing displaying earlier, got over in display flight. N. Birds visiting a probable nest site, maybe going in and out of a nest hole or dense vegetation where you can't actually find the nest, but you think it's there. A. Agitated behaviour or alarm calls, suggesting that birds may have a nest or young nearby. This can be frustrating because often in these circumstances you think there's breeding there and you can't confirm it, but of course you should be acting to avoid disturbance and creating anxiety to breeding birds. And I is for a brood pattern on an adult bird. This is really one only for ringers who might see that on a bird they have in the hand, indicating it is currently incubating, hence I. It has that bare patch on the belly that keeps the eggs warm. And finally, B for nest building or nest hole excavating. So if you see birds carrying feathers or sticks early on in the breeding season, for example. Record the best evidence codes you see based on the order I've run through. So B for nest building is better than P for pair, for example. But for all records you submit, it's possible to include text giving more details, covering all the breeding evidence that you might have observed, extra detail, extra information. Finally, we have the group of codes for confirmed breeding. So, firstly, DD. Quite a rare one. This refers to distraction display or injury feigning. So it's related to the probable code A of alarming, but refers to those species that will display very high levels of agitation, really indicate that they must have young nearby, and they do these remarkable displays of pretending to be injured to lure predators away from the nest or the young. It's mostly done by waders such as dotterel, some waterfowl, ducks for example, will do it as well. UN stands for used nest or eggshells. As long as you're happy they came from the most recent breeding season, it's not an older breeding site. It's often a good way to confirm breeding for divers, for example, finding vacated nest scrapes on the edge of locks at the end of the summer. FL, slightly confusing one, as it covers both recently fledged young, hence FL, but also the downy young of Nidifugus species. That's those in which the young leave the nest shortly after hatching. It's from the Latin for nest and to flee, you want to know? So waterfowl on waders where the chicks are out and about long before they can fly, they'll get balls of fluff. But these still count under the evidence code FL, even though they haven't fledged. The key thing to consider when using this code, particularly for recently fledged young, is whether the young birds have come from the site itself or they might have come in from a breeding attempt elsewhere. They're already dispersing. This is a bit of a matter of judgment. How old are the young birds? How strongly can they fly? Are they still in the family party? Perhaps still being fed by the parents, which suggests they must have come from the site. Had the species been present at the site earlier in the breeding season? If you find a juvenile luttering plover on its own at a site where there haven't been any luttering plovers earlier in the year, should really be counted. ON for occupied nest. Birds entering or leaving a nest site indicating the nest is being used, actively breeding. It might be a nest hole or a nest high up you can't see into. Or it might be birds where you can see incubating birds. You can't actually see underneath them to see the eggs to prove that, but you know they're incubating. It's occupied nest. FF is adult birds carrying food for the young. So making flights carrying food. With raptors, not just carrying a prey item to a perch, making longer flights back to a nest. Or in the case of passerines, also counting birds carrying fecal sacs away from the nest, indicating they have young there. NE is for nests containing eggs. Remember that we don't encourage the disturbance of rare breeding birds to record this, unless you're doing so as part of a formal monitoring scheme, such as the BTO's nest record scheme. And for most rare breeding birds, you'll be breaking the law, unless you have a specially issued Schedule 1 licence disturbing them to see eggs, so don't. And finally, NY, a nest with young in, which in some cases might include young heard rather than seen from a nest hole of a woodpecker, for example. So there you have it. There'll be a blog with these codes in which you can refer to, and it's quite easy to remember the most important ones. S for singing, P for pair, D for display, FL for fledged, or downy young out of the nest, ON for an occupied nest, NY for a nest with young. Please remember to add these to your records however you submit them, and you're instantly making them more valuable for county recording and the national level work of the Rare Breeding Birds Panel in supporting the conservation of our rare breeding birds. Thank you.